Clayton Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr Chair, to rise tonight to speak on the annual review debate in the environment sector on specifically the Department of Conservation. And when I thought about my contribution tonight, I thought it was a good idea that I should start with the Minister's speech last year on the budget debate and some of his comments that he made in relation to that. And he was talking about this government having tighter controls of spending and a strong focus on value for money, sir. He also goes on to talk about the government's fiscal priorities, and some of those priorities were returning to surplus this year and retaining a surplus in the future. I'd certainly like to see how that goes, and the jury is certainly out on that mark. Reducing net debt to 20% of GDP by 2020, including repaying debt in dollar terms. I wonder if that includes selling off state houses, selling off banks and further sell-offs of our power companies to try and get to that surplus and maintain it. And finally, we go on to using any further fiscal headroom to reduce debt faster. Mr Chair, I have to bring it to the attention of the House that there has been a real shortfall in this budget speech of last year, because despite all of the MPs on the other side who take great pleasure in telling us what a fantastic environment we've got, and I do agree with the Minister that the Department of Conservation do a magnificent job. However, the reality is for tourism, which has been driven so heavily through our conservation, through our beautiful rivers, wonderful lakes, mountains, our walks, the eco-tourists that come to New Zealand for this beautiful country, we are certainly not, as a government, taking it seriously and funding it adequately. Mr Speaker, I bring your attention to page 13 of a 13.5-page speech, which has 2 sentences dedicated to looking after the Department of Conservation. It says, "Kiwi are New Zealand's most iconic birds, but numbers are declining every year. The budget contains $11 million of funding over 4 years for breeding and predator control programs run by community groups as well as the Department of Conservation." Mr Speaker, Mr Chair, they have not increased funding. In actual fact, they have taken it from one department, being the Natural Heritage Management Program, and put that into the Kiwi Fund. It is just a shuffling of paper and relocation of funds. If they really were taking conservation seriously, sir, they would adequately fund this very, very important organisation that has seen job cuts. We have seen the closing of walks and tracks, the closing of dock huts, and of course restructuring of $12.5 million, which have just been absolutely useless, worthless, unless, sir, you are talking about those restructuring of losing all 100+ jobs. If you are trying to create low staff morale and job uncertainty, I think they did a good job in that sector. Our brand of 100% pure New Zealand is a brand that other countries like Ireland are trying to take up and hold on their mantle, because their government are taking conservation seriously and looking after their flora, their fauna and their topography, and creating an environment where tourists and eco-tourists can go and see. We need to seriously fund the Department of Conservation, and I hope that we see that coming the budget very shortly. Mr Speaker, I'll also tell a quick story about life being a journey. And at any point in time, you could take your location in life, but it doesn't give you a clear picture. Life is actually about the trajectories and the direction, the vectors in which you're travelling in. And what we can do, sir, is ensure that the trajectory that the Department of Conservation is travelling on through the guidance of this government is this. In 2009, sir, the real expenditure for the Department of Conservation was $403 million. In 2015, it has dropped to $342 million, some $60 million drop since 2009. In real terms, sir, that's a negative trajectory that the Conservation Minister and this government are not putting the priority onto one of our biggest, in fact, it is our biggest export, is the export tourist dollar. And then, of course, we've got capital expenditure. In 2008, sir, it was $98 million being invested into the Conservation Department, particularly into track upgrades, into dock huts around the country, sir. That has fallen down in 2015 from $98 million to $23.5 million, sir.
So, Sarah Dowie.